Yeah, greetings, viewers. I'd like to welcome you to another PACM session. And because this is August, the 1st of August, we'll be dedicating this month to focusing on things around Marcus Garvey. And I'm very pleased to say I have Brother Kimani, who's just dropped out a bit. He'll be back in a bit with me today, and he'll be giving the main presentation. And his presentation is entitled Libation or and Liberation. So what we'll be doing, he said he'll be speaking for about 45 minutes, laying out the whole presentation, and then after which we'll be opening up the floor for contributions. So please listen, and any questions you want to send in, please use the interactive part just in the right hand side that you can send in questions, and you can also send in comments to the screen today. So while Professor Kimani is getting ready, what I would like to do is just give, for those who are new to this channel, just a little background on the channel and the PACM itself. Now, the Pan-African Congress movement, who's hosts this channel, is an organization that's been around since 1975. We are a Pan-Africanist organization, and that was founded, it came out of the Sixth Pan-African Congress when a group of its members visited Dar es Salaam in Tanzania to attend that Congress, after which the Pan-African Congress movement was born in 1975. Now, the chair for today's meeting will be Brother Washington, Washi, and he's just come into the studio. So I'll be in the background doing the technical things. So Brother Washi has come. He'll give you more of a rundown on the organization and the whole month, Messiah month of Marcus Garvey, while I try to get Brother Kimani back into the studio. So I'll bring Brother Washi on screen now and see. Uh, Greetings, Brother Washi.
Greetings, greetings, Rataka,
Oh,
greetings.
great. You can hear now. Yeah, that's fine.
Yes.
So we're live on screen now. Brother Command is just having a little bit of technical difficulty. So I'm going to hand over to you to give an introduction
Yeah.
while I,
Okay.
contact Brother Command and get him back into the studio. So I'm going to hand over to you
Yeah.
just to give an introduction about the Pan-African Congress movement. And so I'll be handing over to you right now. Yep. So you ready? Okay.
Okay. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Greetings, brothers and sisters in Cyberland, or if you want to prefer to be online. It's Emancipation Day, 1st August. It's a time of reflection. It's a time of looking back as well as looking forward as where we as an African people, as a race, has come from when we were removed from the motherland. And therefore, after fighting so much for our political, economic, and cultural freedom, then back in the Caribbean in 1834, 1st of August has become a central day of reflection as part of our heritage and as part of our way on the liberation route. Today, throughout the Caribbean and in parts of the UK, different sections where the African community is, there are different activities marking Emancipation Day. And the Pan-African Congress movement, no less, is one of those organizations as we speak. They're about to commence Emancipation Day rituals, reflections, and perspective on the future in Birmingham. As you are currently aware, a large number of the work of the liberation struggle continues online due to the pandemic which we are experiencing worldwide. The Pan-African Congress movement as an organization, a movement that continues to see and to continue to hold the liberation of African people throughout the world on the mother continent as an essential part of its work. This organization, due to the present crisis, we were unable to have quite a number of activities as usual, but part of our work is an educational program. And therefore, we look forward to work and continue to carry out these different educational programs. This month being August, 1st of August today, it's become a very important month for us as African people, other than the Emancipation Day. It's also a day, a month which, 17th of August, Right Reverend Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey, not Reverend, but most eminent activist, African scholar, and a warrior for African liberation, was born on the 17th of August. And it's so fitting that we use this month to reflect on his work and his philosophy. And against this background, part of the Pan-African Congress movement was founded. The movement has grown in several areas. Centrally, what we want to talk about this afternoon is how we have been able to bring about some of our scholars and activists to share with their work and to help people to become more aware and therefore be more conscious of what they need to do, the leadership they need to provide in helping the movement to continue along the liberation movement path. And this afternoon, as part of the continued work of the Pan-African Congress movement, we have an eminent scholar and activist who will be broadcasting from us live from the United States of America. Brother Taka, are you still hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you. We're just
Taka,
having a yeah,
are you hearing me?
yes, I'm hearing. Can you hear me?
So I am being heard because I'm not hearing myself. So I'm just wondering, am I
Yes,
still
I can hear you loud and
live?
clear. Yes, you're live and I can hear you. So if you just carry on for a bit while I try and get Brother Kimani, Professor Kimani back into the studio. So let's carry on a bit longer. Yeah, but I can hear you loud and clear.
Brother Taka?
Yes, carry on speaking. I can
Brother
hear you.
Taka?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, I can't hear myself, so that's the reason. Yeah, okay. Right. So as I was saying, in carrying on part of the educational work of the Pan-African Congress movement, we are pleased to bring you eminent scholar, academia, as well as also an activist in
Yeah, greetings, Brother Kimani. You're back on?
Yes, I am. Are you hearing me?
Yes. Yeah, I can hear you clear. Brother Washington's having a bit of difficulty there, so while we'll just carry on. So he was just introducing, giving a background on the PACM. So now I think we'll be ready for you to go into your lecture.
Okay.
So again, if you want to bring up the PowerPoint, then I'll just put it up on screen.
It's up already.
The PowerPoint. Let's see. Oh yeah. Okay, I'm putting it up now. That's fine. Yep, your PowerPoint's up.
Right.
Yeah, so you can proceed now then.
All right. So, a good evening to listeners in Europe and Africa. Good afternoon to listeners in Eastern United States and the Caribbean. And good day to listeners in Mid and West United States, or good afternoon in some places there too. It's an important occasion for us to meet together to consider things about ourselves as African people and friends and allies of Africa. So I've been asked to present this lecture on libation and liberation. And it comes from a text that I've written, and I'm hoping to explain the background to that text or the writing of the text as we go along. Libation really is liquid offerings to the Creator or Supreme Being, the being that we commonly call God, to spirits of the ancestors, spirits of lesser divinities too. Some of our ancestors have been elevated to lesser divinities, to those physically present for the purpose, and to those who are not physically present. I need to explain this. We are all composed of spirit and matter. And sometimes, although somebody or a number of people may not be physically present in a space, they may be spiritually there. And this is what libation is substantially about. So when we pour libation, we pour for those who are here, as well as those who are not here in the physical sense. We pray or we pour for those who are unborn. And we pour for our environment also, because Africans, as a fundamental of our spirituality, understand that we are part of the environment, Mother Earth. And there are certain things about Mother Earth, about our environment, that I'm going to explain later on as part of that understanding. Now, we meet today on the 1st of August, and it's important for us to understand the context in which we're meeting. It's important for every individual, as well as every group of people, to periodically celebrate as well as reflect on important moments in their own life. And today, as we meet, we have this sudden explosion of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is significant in the sense that it's international, that people who are Africans as well as people who are not Africans are saying, look, we need to pay attention to police murder of African people in Western society. We need to pay attention to the general oppression of African people in Western society. And this moment also offers us a chance to consider ourselves in our entire history and culture. So what was so important about the 1st of August in 1838 when something happened in British-dominated parts of the Caribbean? Many people say we had freedom, we had emancipation. Some people even said that we were emancipated. I wish to differ. We certainly did not receive freedom, we did not receive emancipation, and nobody did that for us. What happened on the 1st of August in 1838 was the legal termination of physical enslavement, the legal end of physical enslavement. It was not emancipation, and it was not freedom. Freedom is something that only a people could do for themselves. It's self-action. It's a demonstration of agency. And that's what our enslavers sought to take away from us, our agency. And to believe that they suddenly one day woke up and said, we're going to give these people back their freedom and so on, really is to indulge in wishful thinking and is to be tricked by them into the false belief that A, they were the major agencies or the agents of the space that we got there, the unlimited freedom that we got on that day, and that B, we don't need anything else. So freedom is self-action, and also it's continuous. You know, in 1838, our people won a great battle so that we had freedom of association and freedom of work or not to work, freedom of who we could work with or for. It wasn't total freedom, and freedom is never total in that way. As soon as we gain some amount of victory, other challenges arise. Sometimes other challenges that were there before remain. So freedom is something we must continuously struggle for. And our progress, any people's progress in space and time, therefore, is always a work in progress. As I say, progress is always a work in progress. I mentioned the end of physical enslavement just now. And this does not touch at all the most fundamental form of enslavement, which is mental enslavement. Europeans and Arabs control the minds of African people, and some of them still do. And that's the worst kind of enslavement, mental enslavement. When they captured us, one of the things they did is to try to make us forget our history. Fact is, they told us you have no history. You didn't construct that glorious civilization in Kemet, ancient Egypt. Your people never did anything. They also told us that our culture was nothing. They were busy copying elements of our culture, but they said that same culture that they copied from is nothing. It's negative, negative, negative. So they used their religion, Christianity or Islam, their systems of miseducation and faulty socialization in church, the mosque, schools, mass media like the newspapers, the cinema, the television, social media, etc., etc., to send false and demeaning messages to our people and to tell us that really we should try to become them, which is impossible and stupid. So the ethnocide that they committed, the assassination of African identity, African culture, and the ethnic cleansing of history of African achievement is what we call the Ma'afa. And it's important for us to understand, in a nutshell, what the Ma'afa is all about. It is the taking away of African identity and the putting of somebody else's hodgepodge identity into African people. So we're confused. We no longer know who we are. And because we no longer know who we are, we do not know what our interests are. And because we don't know what our interests are, we cannot pursue them actively, progressively, with a great focus and sincerity. So part of our duty is to throw off the mental enslavement of Arabs and Europeans, is to return to ourselves, to reattach ourselves to our history and culture, to become African again, a process people call re-Africanization. And one of the things that marks that process is our recapture, retaking, and reincorporation of our rituals, our ancestral rituals in our daily lives. This is another way of coming back in touch with our ancestors. So what's a ritual? Well, a ritual is thought, word, and action of great significance. The ritual we're talking about today is libation. And libation is the thinking of coming together of African people, past, present, and future, across time and times, and across space and spaces, so that we meet spiritually in a sacred realm to further our own interest, whatsoever the interest of that moment, that meeting is all about. But because Africans are spiritual people and our rituals articulate our spirituality, let me just take one moment to tell us, to reinforce this, that for African people, everything happens in a divine cosmic order, the seen world as well as the unseen world. When the Rasta man and woman says everything is everything, or other people say it also, what they actually mean is that we're all interconnected, although those interconnections may not be seen immediately or at all. If we think about it, every person and everything in the cosmos is interrelated, interconnected. And in order to understand that, let us understand too that if you interfere with any one aspect of the cosmos, you're threatening the entire thing. Many of these European people who thought only about today and perhaps tomorrow never understood that. So they did a whole lot of things, injured the environment, and today the world, the earth, is faced with environmental disaster. That's why our people always sought to preserve life. And when we had to take life, like you go to hunt the deer, you took only what was necessary for your purpose. You never took a life form wantonly. So everything is related and everything is everything. So libation takes place in that context, that understanding. And libation, although we may not know it, is in the diaspora, although not as clearly defined and understood as it should be. So when Tupac Shakur did his record on Pour Out a Little Liquor, he was talking about libation, because libation is pouring out liquor in small amounts for people who are there as well as not there. Nas, just a moment. These guys are talking about their homies who are not there. Some of them are in jail, but they're not there physically, but they're there spiritually, because they would agree with that gathering, the purpose of that gathering, whether they know about it or they don't know about it. They're there spiritually because they would have been in agreement with it. Kaisonians like Stalin and Sparrow play one for Mello, or you hear people saying, pour one for somebody. All these are moments that articulate libation. But because of the context of the attack on African culture, many of our people were forced to abbreviate our rituals. So they just wrote a little bit on the floor and say, hey, pour one for so-and-so, or for those who are not here, or for one of them boys, or one for them boys, or one for the road. When you're about to leave a gathering, one for the road means that I'm pouring a libation or a drink, which is the same thing, for the spirits that guard the road, so that nothing bad will happen to me while I'm on that road. In other words, a safe passage to where I'm going, most times at home. In the creative imagination of Africans on the continent, a number of Africans have mentioned libation, and shouldn't be surprising. Achebe, Aikwe Arma, Elichi Amadi, Florent Wapa, Ben Okri, and many, many others, because libation is a part of African culture. Same thing you'll find in the diaspora. I've already mentioned Tupac and Nas and Sparrow and so on. Those people who write novels, Kamau Braithwaite, Roy Heath, Austin Clarke, Brenda Flanagan, and many others, they mention libation in their texts. So we see that in the diaspora, people are going back to reclaim things, even though we don't always do it in a very conscious and powerful manner as we're trying to do, and we're achieving more and more now with more and more knowledge. We've always been going back to fetch valuable things, and libation is one of those things. So we're having those Sankofa moments, and hence the Sankofa bird in this slide. So what's libation all about? We know that. Where did it come from? Well, the first hard evidence we have of libation, like many other things about African culture, is in ancient Egypt. And I'm going to get to that in a moment. But even before we reach ancient Egypt, thousands of years ago, they've discovered a place called Napa Playa from thousands of years ago. And it had a huge altar. It's to the south of Egypt in inner Africa. And it's obvious that sacred things went on there. So it's easy to speculate, perhaps logical to do so, that libation was part of what happened there. But we have a profusion of information of libation in Kemet, ancient Egypt, in the sacred lecture, in the writing, the medal lecture. So how do we know it? Well, here are a couple of terms from libation in ancient Egypt. Keb, which means to purify or to present libations, and kebu, which means libation. This is in the ancient Egyptian language, the first written language in the world, invented and presented by our African ancestors. You have another word that means cool through water, and this word actually meant to not only be cool, but to be comfortable and so on, okay? And pouring libation puts you in that mental state that you're at ease and harmony with people and things in the universe. The root of the term keb, which also means libation, cool through water, also means to humble oneself before a divinity. And it's important for us to keep remembering that. We are not greater than our environment, than our ancestors, than the Almighty, the Creator. So we need to humble ourselves before our divinities. And part of that means just being cool. Okay. There's also a word for a priest who poured libation. That was that priest's speciality. It's important to understand that because this tells us that in Kemet, ancient Egypt, libation was a very elaborate ritual and that you had specializations taking place inside of that. Where we have images of libation, priests pouring libation from ancient Kemet. In the earliest records of Kemet, we have women making presentations of sensing and other things that are associated with a combined ceremony that you're going to see later on, in which libation was a part. This is important because we live in a world in which women, the slightly greater portion of humanity, have been oppressed. This is part of the sickness of other cultures that have oppressed us, and some of us have inhabited that kind of principle. And it's important to show that in our ancestors' understanding of things, women were different but equal to men. And here we have women making presentations. This is another one where you see a woman making a presentation. Here you have a ruler making a presentation of incense and of libation. And that ruler is Menkara. Now, I mentioned an integrated ritual long, long ago at the foundations of Kemet. There was an integrated ritual in which there was the first fruits, there was sensing, there was libation, and there was sacrifice or blood offering. And then later on, word offering came about. Word offering turned to the libation statement and to prayers in nowadays Christianity and other religions. And I mention this because very often the very people who oppressed us took elements of our own culture that we created and hand them back as oppressing tools to us. And we don't understand that these things came from us originally in a different context. And they're trying to tell us that we never invented anything. So, as I said, the word offering evolved into prayers, but it also evolved into praises and praising in the praise tradition of Africa. Throughout Africa, you have that praise tradition where there are praise poems, there are hymns, there are praise songs. And many of these songs often criticize the rulers and ridicule them, but not full out. You know, this is where you have double and triple montal, where you say one thing, but you could mean something else. And you find the same thing reflecting themselves in the caisels in the Caribbean. Some people say calypso, but that's an incorrect pronunciation. It's a corruption. Calypso has nothing to do with our people. Calypso was a Greek individual. Kaiso is what our people brought from Africa. So you have the libation statement, kaiso, praise and blame and ridicule, all that taking place. So in doing a ceremony, a ritual of libation, because we are on sacred occasions and in sacred spaces, many people show respect by covering heads, kneeling, taking off your shoes, or wearing white. And many of us will be familiar with wearing white on these sacred occasions. Taking off the shoes has a whole lot of hygiene benefits and so on. Kneeling is a sign of humbling yourself before divinity. Covering your head is another way of doing that. So here are some usual questions. Why do we pour libation? Well, we pour libation, first of all, because we want to get back to ourselves as Africans. This is an African thing, and we want to do it. It's our ritual. We also want to reattach ourselves to our history and our culture, to our ancestors. We do that because we're doing the same things that our ancestors do. We may have some innovation here and there. For example, in the cold climate in which we live, if it's winter, we wouldn't pour libation outside and we wouldn't stand barefoot in the snow and so on and so on. Who could pour libation? Well, anybody could pour libation. But in the very important occasions, powerful occasions, a spiritual leader or an elder assisted appropriately by other people would either lead or do the pouring of libation. Where should libation be poured? Well, generally in the midst of a gathering, but also it could be done if you're doing a libation on your own or just 2 or 3 people. You may want to do it on an altar or at an altar in your own home. You may want to do it in the entry to your home, the entry to your village, the entry to your farm, or something like that, right? Some significant spot. When should libation be poured? Well, whenever you have the urge to do it. But also, libation should be poured at very important occasions when the community meets. You know, like today on the 1st of August, we may have a community occasion and we pour libation so that we announce the purpose of the meeting, we think about it, we arm ourselves and fortify ourselves, as you're going to see later on, spiritually, psychologically, mentally. Now, on very large occasions, significant occasions, people prepare for libation by cleansing and fortifying the mind and the body, as well as the immediate physical side. You cleanse your mind by excluding those things that don't matter and thinking about the occasion for what you're going to be pouring the libation. You cleanse the body by taking purgatives and so on, and abstain from doing certain things. You cleanse the immediate physical side by using Florida water and so on. You know, you clean it out, and then you sprinkle Florida water or Kananga water or one of our African spiritual liquids to cleanse the site, also to give it a certain fragrance. You could also be burning and should also be burning incense to really make that place into what it ought to be. So cleansing And preparation is spiritual, it's mental, and it's physical also. What materials do we need for libation? Well, there are lots of cultural materials. Drums, for example, liquid. Generally, in the West, when you use alcohol, it's white rum or some strong liquid that is white. But you could use water, people use honey. Fact is, any liquid could be used. But the tradition of African people in West Africa and the diaspora is to use a strong white liquid. There should be incense, as I mentioned just now, Kananga water, Florida water, and so on. We, on this moment of libation ceremony, generally form ourselves into a circle. And that's because the circle is the stronger shape. It has no beginning and no end. It's a continuous formation that encompasses all who are inside of it and emphasizes inclusion but not exclusion. There's a ritual in which the circle is formed. There's an acclamation of purity. You know, the person who is going to, or persons who are going to perform libation, you know, they say, I'm pure. You know, I didn't come here with any defilement. They put their hands forward in the ancient Kemetic sign of peace and purity. And then the person may be introduced, or he or she may introduce themselves by reciting their genealogy. You know, this is one way in which African people remember our genealogy, so that the youngsters who are there will know they come from this line, because here is Uncle so-and-so pouring the libation, and he's reciting that he's the son of so-and-so, who is the son of so-and-so, who is, you know, and they go way back as far as they could remember over the generations. So you know that you are not alone. You belong to a long line of people, and you're continuing something that was with us from time immemorial. So there's an invocation where you invoke the following spiritual presences: the Supreme Being. Our people were the first to know, discover, and know the Supreme Being. And we know the Supreme Being by many names in very many dispensations of being African. And this is something we need to be emphasizing. There's no one way of being African. But to be African means certain things that are common to all African people. And it's important for us to understand, while in ancient Kemet, we propitiated, worship Amun. Today, somebody in another part of the African world may be saluting the same divinity, the creator, but by a different name. It doesn't matter. It's our creator. We have known this creator in different places and spaces at different times by different names, but it's the same creator. We salute the lesser divinities. You know, our arrangement is there's a creator, and then there are lesser divinities, gods if you wish, each one of whom has special responsibilities, like the president with a cabinet or prime minister with a cabinet, you know. Then our sacred ancestors. Some of our sacred ancestors have been elevated to the realm of lesser divinities, and we will find that. Then there's a lament. Why are we here? You know, we need to keep remembering, especially those of us in the diaspora, the thousands, millions of our ancestors whose bones still roll around on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. We must include them. We don't know their names, but we know them. And we must lament what happened to them as a way of recognizing them and being more determined that we are going to carry forward their struggle. It doesn't matter where we reach, we're going to be seeking more freedom. We also pour libation to those who are here but not here. We invoke them, you know, those who are past, those who are present but not physically here, the unborn, those who are yet to come. We also invoke the environment, because African people understand that we are a part of the environment. We are not separate, distinct, and apart from the environment. It is our duty to recognize that we are children of nature And although we strive to improve what nature has given us, we'll never destroy nature. So there is the pouring, and at each pour you make, you invoke the spirit of one of these beings, and you say Ashe. You may give a drum roll, and when you're finished, you have a release where the person who's been performing the ritual is released from that divine duty, the present among the spirits of the invoked beings. And then that person returns, says, I've returned, I'm back. And the liquid that's collected could be the basis of a communal cup, where it's passed around the circle. Everybody may have a sip. If you do not drink or do not wish to drink, that's fine. You may pour a little out on the floor as another libation that you yourself is offering to all of those people there. So it's important that we understand that that communal cup is what people go to church and do communion today. And some of our very people have been so messed up by our enemies that we wouldn't want to do a communal cup, but we go to the church, the European church, and we take part in communion. And we think that we're being higher up and better off, but we're actually participating in our own oppression in the most amusing way, because Europeans got that from us. And the last thing we normally do is sing Bob Marley's Redemption song, which needs no introduction to any of us. What are the benefits of libation? No, we know it. Cultural continuity to eternity. We've got to be determined this time that we're always going to be African. We're not going to allow anybody to shift us from being ourselves. So we're going to continue ourselves as ourselves. We receive spiritual and mental fortification from libation, because when we pour libation for a particular occasion, like today, we're talking about how important it is to continue our culture, our rituals, our tradition. We think about it, we understand it, we discuss it, and we receive mental and spiritual fortification. But we also receive fellowship from libation. If you know that there are other people there with you, spiritually present as well as physically present, or any one of those two, you receive fortification. If you know that, okay, I am pouring libation every day at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I know that there are 20 of us who are doing it in different places, spaces, at the same time, or even at a slightly different time, that's fellowship. That's a kind of union, a kind of fortification that takes place. So we receive psychological and mental preparation for the day or the period ahead, because if we're pouring libation for this day, we're thinking about the things that we want to achieve for that day and the challenges that lie ahead. And that's what libation is partly about. When you've already saluted all of those spirits, those divinities, and other sacred entities, you make a statement to what you want to achieve. This is why I'm pouring this libation today, because I want to achieve these two things today. So that's mental preparation for what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And of course, there's community reinforcement, because those people you pour libation with, especially in those ritual moments when you have many people together, you come together as family, clan, village, and you do the same thing at the same time. So you reinforce your community bonds. And this is where I have to ask us, shouldn't we organize African national libation rituals so that on this day, the 1st of August, Africans throughout the world, maybe we could start with Britain or Europe, we appoint somebody to go to a particular place with as many people as possible, and you pour libation for all the African people. Something to think about. Here are some instruments of libation. This is Akhenaten pouring libation and Nefertiti long, long ago in Kemet. This is somebody pouring libation as well as censing, doing incense. Here's another scene. You know, this is libation, a sacred libation part of the coronation ceremony of the pharaoh. Today you call this baptism in the European church. They got it from us. This is the water of life. You see the angst there. This is a libation that's being poured when this person passed a certain important occasion in their life. In this case, is the coronation of a pharaoh. And we have many other instances. This is the same ceremony, different occasion. These are altars. You have different libations here. This is Hatsetsu, making offerings. This is part of the cover of my book, from which I've taken most of what I've said just now. This is the Harka, pouring libation before a divinity. This is Pepi the First, Hatshepsut again, Thutmose again, Thutmose the Fourth, and so on. We have modern day libations, in Africa and in the diaspora. This is a building that was built by some of our ancestors in my village. It's called Queenstown because the villagers were tricked into the belief that the English Queen really gave them emancipation. So today we know better than that. But this is a church that's built in the shape of the ship that brought our ancestors from Africa. And here it stands today in a village in Guyana on the Essequibo coast. And this is a way of our people saying, hey, remember where we come from. Who are you? Why did you come here? How did you get here? Do you know who you are? Do you really know who you are? Libation asked us these questions. And these are urgent questions for any generation. And here's a building that asks us the same. This is a libation ceremony in the diaspora. This is libation in ancient Greece and Rome. Our ancestors were so powerful that other people have been trying to imitate us for the longest while. And we could go on. This is libation in ancient Babylon. Well, you need any introduction to this? They're still doing it. And all of this says, we're here. So that's the end. I'm open for questions.
Okay, Brother Kimani?
Yes?
Yes. Yeah, thank you for that very informative and very well explained African tradition. And I just want to raise a few issues with you before I start to see what our listeners have brought before us. As you mentioned, it's part of our heritage. And you spoke about the lament.
Yes.
Those of us who are aware of what happens in a typical communion ceremony in the Christian church and even in some other type of faith, you can clearly see that there is a close relationship between the lament in libation and a communion ceremony. What is it that you think why Christianity probably adopted this practice, but refused to see it as a libation?
Sorry, I didn't get the last thing you said.
Yeah. Why is it that you think that Christianity adopt this practice, the libation ceremony, which is transformed into a communion service, but refuses to see it as libation? And in fact, right across most Christian faith, libation is seen as being devil worship, but they do adopt that.
Well, there are two reasons there. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
Yeah. The first reason is that when Europeans encountered Africans, they encountered a superior civilization, except in one way, and this is the second encounter, and that's military. They were better at military technology, and that's what they used to overpower and enslave us. But even going back at the time of Kemet, when they went to Kemet, they went as little people who were uncivilized. Most of the original Greek scholars, Pythagoras, Hippocrates, many of them, they went to university in Kemet. Pythagoras spent 22 years there. So they were encountering a vast superior civilization, and they tried to copy what they saw. But many of them didn't understand things fully. So they copied little parts of it. Now, the second aspect of your question is, why do they deny us that they got it from us? This started only when they began to enslave us. And it's important for us to understand that Europeans could not enslave us and maltreat us in all those ways while admitting that we had a superior culture to them, far, far superior, that we invented humanity, invented civilization, and so on. They had to say, look, we're maltreating these people because they're really not people. And so they began to spread that vicious set of lies in order to try to explain away their barbarity, their inhumanity towards us. And it's the same with their and the God they claim to worship. How could you be a Christian and be behaving in the most ungodly and unchristian way towards other human beings, especially those that you learn so much from? So Western civilization is being found out today because it has a whole lot, it rests on a lot of hypocrisy, a lot of moral indignation, a lot of moral impropriety. You know, there's a running sore at the heart of Western civilization. And, you know, we've got to ask a question. It's a fundamental one when you look at the history of this world. How is it that in the last 600 or so years, a small group of backward people, some people call them uncivilized, from a resource-starved part of the world, Western Europe, could impose themselves upon other people throughout most of the world? They're still trying to do it. They did it by military violence. They robbed, they stole, they murdered, they raped. And it's important for us to understand that African people have been the greatest victims of this barbarity. And we are now beginning to pull ourselves together and correct ourselves. So libation is one of those things we're doing. Back to you, bro.
Yeah. Another issue I want to bring up with you is you mentioned quite a number of benefits about libation, and you spoke about the mental fortitude that libation brings about. Now, here is one of the areas where Christianity has an issue with libation, in that they said you're calling in people of the dead. And why are you calling in people who have passed on? But when you look on Christian worship, even other religions, they have their prophets, and their prophets have all passed, gone, and they feel proud and they feel very what is the issue there? Why their prophets have also passed on, but they feel justified that their prophets can be calling, but they have a problem with you calling your ancestor's name, be it their family member.
Look, brother, that's just a case of simple European and Arab racism. What they're actually doing is saying that they have the right to do certain things, but we don't have the right to do those same things. And the fact is, we must do it in a twisted way. You know, some of the people, our people who claim to be Christians, I have a certain conversations with them. And one of them is this. When they say to me that libation is ancestral worship, I said, we don't worship our ancestors. We propitiate them, we honor them, we glorify them, but we don't worship them. We only worship divinity, God. If an ancestor has become a divine, we'll worship that ancestor. But how is it that you, who call yourselves Christians, you allow white people who've done the greatest evil to African people, our people, for the longest time, they tell you that you must worship their ancestors, John and all of these people. These are white ancestors. They even try to make Jesus white and say you must worship this white guy. But you mustn't honor your own ancestors who fought and bled and died for you. How? I mean, this is the height of being ridiculous. There's some words that you could use that are not appropriate for a conversation in this forum. You know, and it's important for us to understand the effrontery, the trickery that these people try to perform on us. You know, so we mustn't buy that racist nonsense. We mustn't allow people in a tradition that did the greatest evil to our people. We mustn't allow that tradition of evil to define who we are and what we do. We must stand in the shoes and upon the shoulders of our ancestors, because that's the best way of being. We've got 600 and more years of example that if you try to become somebody else, you're going to look like a fool, because you could never become somebody else. You could only be yourself. And the best way of being yourself is carrying forward the tradition of your ancestors. Let me just say this. Our ancestors understood that each human being is composed of different aspects. In ancient Egypt, there were 9 different aspects. One of those aspects is a collective spirit that people call spirit or soul. These are not very accurate terms to describe them, but I'm going to use them. And our ancestors also understood that each one of us inhabits and is an example of the spirit of our ancestors, and that sometimes that spirit could dwell in our flesh. Later on, Europeans discovered the thing that you call genes, and they realized that each one of us is somebody who's got genes from our maternal ancestors, our mother's line, and got genes from our paternal ancestors, our father's line. This is what our ancestors in ancient Egypt and perhaps even before, that's what they were talking about. They might have used different words, but that's what they were talking about. So we mustn't be shaken out of our understanding of ourselves by some people who've just recently appeared upon the face of the earth and have proven themselves to be barbarians for the most part.
Well, another issue I want to raise with you, continuing similar about the practice of pouring libation. I don't know how much you're familiar with how some Catholic priests and Anglican priests or leaders laid the loved one to rest. I remember growing up, and it was quite symbolic for the priest or the person who is in charge of the ceremony while someone has passed on the funeral to burn some incense at the start of the procession leading towards the body. And at the beginning of the ceremony at the grave, they would have poured some liquid. Sometimes it may be alcohol, it may be some different types of incense types water. And when I became more aware of what libation was or is, I started to pay much more close attention to how they bury their dead. And in a sense, they are, in my opinion, I think it's libation they are practicing. However, if you do have a private discussion with the priest or people within the Anglican ceremony, you raise the issue of libation, it is being dismissed. Other than the mental skullduggery which is going on there, what else do you think is happening? Why they continue to hide from this practice?
There's no uncertainty in my mind, brother, about that. Let's get the history straight. Herodotus, who the Europeans claim is the father of history, he's not the father of history. He's probably the father of European history. But he is one who went to Kemet to learn things from our people. And he said that the Greeks got their liturgy, their sacred practices from Kemet, ancient Egypt. And we know that in so many ways. I mean, we could spend days just explaining that. And there are other witnesses who tell us that. And we also know it because when you look at how they practice certain things in ancient Greece, you see it's copy from Kemet. So that's one. And the Greeks taught the Romans taught the rest of the Europeans, especially Western Europe, during the time of the Pax Romana. So we know how these things were transferred from Africa, ancient Egypt, to Europe. That's one. Two, like I said before, Europeans, high and low, far and wide, have engaged in lying because they're committing crimes against humanity, against African people. And their priests, their church, is a prime criminal in this enterprise. And they're not going to, most of them anyhow, are not going to admit that they get their practices from Africa. Why should they? Their mission is to denigrate Africa. These are the people who say, you mustn't name this child Kofi. You must choose a Christian name, John. They're not Christian names, they're European names. And that's how they have been infecting us with an unhealthy preference for European norms and forms over our own African preferences, our own African norms. That's how they help to destroy African identity, confuse us, and make us make wrong, incorrect, harmful choices in our lives. So we can't expect anything better from professional liars, and we must not expect anything better from them. In many instances, the less conversation we have with them, the better. Let's spend that time learning even more about ourselves. That would be my answer.
Yeah, I see like Brother Washi as having a bit of problem connecting. So I'll just take over until he gets back on. So what I'll do now is highlight some of the questions coming in. There's a question here. Yeah. There's a question here by Claudia, and she said she would like to know if we can do libation in our daily life or just on some special occasions.
The answer to that is yes. Many people do libation as one of the first things when they get out of bed in the morning. Some people would do libation around midday. Some people do libation sometime in the evening. There are people who would do libation because they feel moved to pour a libation to some entity, some divine being or some being. So the answer to that, yes. For African people, libation always is a part of important events. So there's a double yes to that. And it's a part of our daily ritual.
Outside of important events, I grew up seeing elderly men and women doing their daily activities, and they will say, this one is for Uncle John, this one is for my great grandfather, and it's spontaneous. So, can you explain more about spontaneous libation?
Well, that's what I mean when I say you feel moved to pour a libation. Um, there's no set time and space for libation. We know that on important occasions, you will be pouring libation. But very often people just come into a house, they feel something, they remember Uncle so-and-so, and they pour a libation for Uncle so-and-so. You see it happening when people are having a drink of alcohol. Very often you see some men around a table, and when they open a new bottle of alcohol, especially when it's a new bottle, you would notice them pouring a little bit on the floor, and they'll say things like, for those who are not here, or somebody will say, hey, pour one for, and they call the name of somebody who used to be friends with them or family. That person is either not physically there because they've departed, they've died, or they're in another part of the world. And we pour libation spontaneously in these ways. So it's important for us to understand that that's part of our tradition too, and that those abbreviated libations have come about because of the barbarity of these same people who tell us that they're Christians, who prevented us on pain of death from practicing our spiritual ceremonies, our rituals on the plantations. And our people abbreviated those rituals. So you'll just see somebody take a quick pour, and you very often don't recognize that that's an abbreviation of a very, very long formal ceremony. And here's something else. Even when we are not prevented from being ourselves, some libations could be long and elaborate. Others could be relatively short. That's how flexible our culture has always been. And libation is a great example of that. So again, the answer is yes and yes.
Going back to the closing of a libation, where you have the communal aspect of it, often at African ceremony, sometimes based on space and how places are organized, it is sometimes difficult to end a libation in that way. But what is generally useful, I've noticed sometimes, is the person who is the master of the libation ceremony, who is the one who has lead on it, will possibly sprinkle some water or alcohol among the audience. And some people sometimes shy away from it, don't want to be wet or running away or something like that. In the presentation, you made some remarks about the liquid aspect of pour libation. Can you elaborate some more on that?
Yeah, there are two things there. One is that it's necessary and therefore possible for us to continue our rituals. And when there is something that prevents us from continuing as we know it. We must become inventive. If you've got 300 people packed together, hopefully not on an occasion of the pandemic, but I've attended occasions when there were a large number of African people in a small room, and you want to make a circle, well, you make concentric circles. Even if you have to remain seated in rows, what you do is stand up and people touch each other. And you imagine that to be a circle, you know? So you don't have to have a physical circle in order to have a circle. We're too inventive to be dictated to by things like inadequate space. That's the first thing. The second thing is this shying away from sprinkling water or alcohol or whatsoever is part of our people being taught by our enemies to hate ourselves. If you hate the rituals of your ancestors, you hate yourself. That's self-hate. And it's part of what I mean when I say that Europeans have taught us to hate ourselves, but love them. They say, you must love your enemies. How stupid could you be? Why do you want to love people who've done all of that to you? And we see the answer to that question in places like Zimbabwe and Tanzania today, where they said apartheid was finished. Mandela come and said, oh, love everybody, you know, and blah, blah, blah. Show me a blade of grass that's been returned to the rightful owners. How about what's happening in Zimbabwe today, where the government of Zimbabwe is actually paying white rapists, murderers, and thieves, the descendants of these people, for doing that to us and giving them back the land and saying, look, you had this land, you stole it from us, you murdered us, you raped us for these hundreds of years. We fought a war against you and won, just like you fought against us when we didn't have guns and you had. What are we paying you now for having despoiled us? How stupid could we be? But when you are disarmed, when you're mentally enslaved, you do something like that because you're not thinking for yourself. You're being remotely controlled by your enemies who have inflicted their own programming into your mind. It's like they're putting a computer virus in your mind. That virus tells you you could only do this, you cannot do that. They're controlling you. They don't even have to be on the spot. They're controlling you. So when we become ourselves again, when we retake our agency and our identity, in a flash, we're going to see the stupidity, the impossibility of a move like those, of moves like those. They've taught us to hate ourselves and to love them. And we need to understand this. Let me give you one more example of the same thing you said. We run away from our sacred things. If you and I went to a corner and we set up a table with a white cloth, an altar, and we have some candles burning, and we have some incense burning, a lot of our people would pass by and shun us. They would say those two people, those two brothers, are working obeah. They say that's evil they're doing. And those same confused people would walk straight into a European church and see them burning incense, same thing, and which they got from us, and they won't even think that there's anything wrong with it. That's how fundamentally possessed many of us have become by these people's view of ourselves and of the world. That is a statement of mental enslavement. That's the kind of thing we need to come out of. Next question.
I'm not seeing anything coming through in the chat so far, so I'll continue the discussion. Your latest work, where you look at documenting libation in its most extensive, most informative way, while carrying out the research, and particularly because I know you have some expertise in language and an interest also in linguistics, what were some of the interesting and intriguing things you came across linguistically while you were preparing the methods of finding out more about the heritage of libation?
Well, one of the things, language always tells you so much. And the ancient Egyptian language, the word keb, which one of the meanings is to be cool, that was so intriguing to me, because today we tell each other, hey, cool out, man, cool out. Oh, I'm cool, man, don't worry, And that's almost, and well, not almost, it's an exact replication of how our people use that word, the same word. Well, not the same word, but the same concept. The ancient Egyptian word for cool was used in the same way. And that concept of being cool is part of the idea of what could happen when you pour libation. You pour libation in order to be cool with the environment, with the creator, with the lesser divinities, with our ancestors, and so on. So that was one of the things that got me. Another thing that got me very, very interesting, I found, is the way in which I've lost my train of thought for a moment. All right. Is the way in which our people have done this ceremony, this ritual of libation, wherever we are. It doesn't matter what word we use to describe it. We're doing the same thing. I mean, some people talk about African people being so different from each other, and we have all of these thousands of languages, and we got many tribes and this and that. Yes, we have different expressions of being African, but we must not believe that we are so different from each other. And libation is one of these rituals that tell us that we belong to each other. It's impossible for people who are so different from each other to have invented the identical ritual thousands of times in different spaces. It's just impossible. It's impossible to happen twice or even three times, much less these thousands of times. So the fact that people do libation in the African world in all of these different spaces tells that we come from being together. We have the same ancestry. We have basically the same culture, because it's the same principles that are being manifested. You can go to the Pacific Ocean, islands in the Pacific Ocean. You have African people who are doing libation there. We don't know enough about ourselves. So all of these are things that, to me, through linguistics, you could tell a whole lot about ourselves.
Continuing your book, you showed quite a few images around different people from our ancestry who were carved out in stones that you would have found. Where did you, not where, but how were you able to help to decipher some of these writings, other than with the aid of other people? But I think some of the images tell the story itself when you look very clearly at the communal cup and the way in which they were held. So the question is, other than the images, what else has been left as part as an artifact that you have come across that helped you in scripting your book?
Well, there are specific artifacts that you could go in different museums and see. So, for example, there's censers where people in Kemet, ancient Egypt, burnt incense, and they presented the burning incense to divine beings, you know, the pharaoh, to other divinities and so on. They're cups that they use to pour libation out of. Their altars that they use. I mean, there's so many things. And I think you may want to consider writing as an artifact. People wrote different things and they mention libation. They say that such and such a person poured a libation. That all of that is evidence, whether or not it's artifact, and I think it's artifact in a certain way. You know, so these are the ways in which I've been able to assemble information. I mean, the story of the first libation is an intriguing one too. So yeah, there are different ways and lots of what we might call hard evidence in the form of artifacts that people left behind, because these are material things that they used for this ritual purpose of libation. And it means that, yes, they were doing this, and you know, you see it replicated in the drawings and in the writings that they left behind too.
Okay, your book being a very important piece of work in highlighting the history and the heritage and the practice of libation. Outside of the motherland, and if you look in the diaspora, what are some of the possible challenges that you have come across and you will probably want to think ahead, having libation more being a part of the African community outside of the motherland? And the second part of my question should have possibly been the first. How extensively is libation in its authentic form is being practiced, as you're aware, in Africa?
Well, I really don't have any big information on the extent to which it is practiced. It seems to me as though it's practiced all over Africa. I've seen references to it very often in different parts of Africa today. What constitutes authenticity is a question of debate. The other thing is that I make no distinction between the motherland and the diaspora in terms of the challenges to the upgrading and the ritualization of libation among us. The challenges spring from the same sources, and that's the imposition of Arabs and Europeans upon us, teaching us or trying to teach us to dislike ourselves, which means disliking our history, our culture, our heritage, and liking theirs. So the challenges are the same. And when you mentioned or we talked about how some of our people shy away from sprinkled water, it's the same thing. You know, some while ago, I was invited to my own country to explain libation like I'm explaining now. And people told me that some of the young African people literally ran out of the hall in which that lecture was to be taking place, because they said that Kimani is coming to do devil work. And that's how the devil has got many of us, running away from ourselves. Like Marley said, you know, you're running and you're running and you're running away, but you can't run away from yourself. You know, some of our brothers and sisters have been so mentally enslaved that they don't even want to stop to think about the works and the achievements of their own ancestors. But they're going to use the inauthentic, the borrowed feathers from the people who oppress us and say, yes, this is the good thing. And not knowing, this is what ignorance does to some of us. They don't know that the Europeans got these practices from us. And one of the most vulgar contradictions, it shows you how blind these people are, is that they would go into the European church, burn incense, do the communal cup, and say, this is good. This is God's work. But they will curse it when it's in our cultural form. You know, that's the kind of stupidity that we have been left practicing because of the mental colonization. I mentioned what happened with the land in Azania and Zimbabwe. That's the greatest tragedy. But people who don't know themselves will end up making that kind of choice.
Okay, I'm going to ask you for 1 minute to suspend your thinking as a historian and put on your linguistic hat. And does it really matter whether we call it libation or it is being termed something else, particularly as it is being practiced by African people in church? Does it really matter that what they are doing is libation in itself? So I would like you to respond linguistically. Does it matter?
There is no distinction and absolutely no contradiction in being a linguist and being a historian. I'm a scholar of the social history and the condition of African people. And I use history, linguistics, sociology, anything that's appropriate, any approach that's appropriate, any skill that's appropriate, any branch of knowledge that's appropriate to achieve my purpose of understanding our people, our past, our culture, and how all of that relates to our present in order to make the best decisions about our future, certainly argue those decisions. So whatever is accessible through linguistics, if I'm capable, I do that. If it's accessible through sociology or psychology or whatever I've learned, I do that. So I wanted to make that very clear, because I know that Europeans have taught us that somehow or the other, if you studied history, you should have nothing to do with geography or psychology. These are different branches of knowledge. They've been organized like that for convenience. But you cannot be a good anything without knowing something about something else. If you do only what you think is history, you won't be good at it. So I want to make that clear. And your point is well taken. It doesn't matter what you call it, is what you do and how you believe in it, how you attach that to yourself, to your own being. And of course, because African people have been in practice of being African for longer than anybody else in this world has been in the practice of being themselves. We could go back for more than 5,000 years clear that we know about. And because also we have been practicing not only for a long time, but over a vast geography also. It seems to me that variation and on occasion difference is very, very natural. So yes, because language is always growing and changing, new terms would come about to describe the same practice that carries or is carried in a different term in another place. And part of our challenge of being African today is not only reattaching ourselves to our ancestral heritage, but also recognizing that another group of Africans might be doing the identical thing in ways that are different or slightly different to those that we know. There is no way in which those differences render those African people either more African or less African. It just means that, as I said before, there are different ways of being African. And it's important for us as Pan-Africanists to embrace those different ways of being African, to embrace the totality of our African world in its vast diversity.
Okay, the point of not separating different branches of knowledge, I fully accept and I understand where you're coming from, because I think one of the best way to be able to explain something and get more of a branch of something is when you look at the different aspect of it in terms of different branches of knowledge being addressed to it. There's a comment here. Let me just have a quick look at it. Somebody's making a comment here. We should also reflect and ask ourselves, where are we today after all the sacrifice our ancestors and their lives and blood, including so many of our heroes, have paid for their lives in battle? I guess the person is asking, we are talking about libation, and if we are still calling on those who have sacrificed their lives to us, what is it that we are asking for today, more than just calling on them when we are doing our reflections and our celebration as African people? So my understanding is that, if I'm right, listener, are you saying that libation probably is not carrying any significance at present? I hope I've interpreted your comments correctly. You want to comment, Brother Kimani?
Yes. The first thing is, libation is what we, the practitioners, make of it. And when we call our ancestors, let's say Marcus Garvey, we give Marcus Garvey life because we're remembering who Marcus Garvey is. I'm not using past tense. We bring him into the present. When we call Sojourner Truth, we're saying, you're here, your spirit is here. We know your example. We understand your works. We're carrying forward those works. And that's the kind of thing I mean when I say we attach ourselves to the struggles, the triumphs, the victories, the errors, the defeats, the mistakes of our ancestors. We attach ourselves to our history. We know where we're coming from. We know what happened in the past. We know what barriers our people were faced with and how we tried to overcome them. In other words, we know our story. And that's one of the greatest pieces of armor in our fight against the people who oppress us. And that's why oppressors never like people who know their history. It's one of the greatest offenses to white supremacists for us to know our history. Knowing our history does two things at least. One, it tells us where we're coming from, what happened. And two, it shows the lies that those people are talking. I could never, ever forget when I published a particular piece called From Medonecha to Ebonics. White people at the University of East London, where I worked, were furious with me, angry. Not all of them, some of them. They knew they couldn't argue with me because I was on firm ground, academically speaking. But they were very angry that I was pointing out the lies and the hypocrisy of Western civilization. And we must not be afraid to understand our past. Those are facts. And the people who are angry with us for knowing those facts expose themselves for the liars, the unchristian, ungodly people that they are. And by now, most of us should recognize that those people don't have anything good to teach us. I mean, how is it that we could accept that these people are Democrats, they're Christians, they're moral people, and they've been busy oppressing us for the last 600 years? We've been up, they've brought us in chains among themselves. Each one of those things they say about themselves is a lie. And those are facts. And it's important for us as a people who are coming into knowledge, understanding, and consciousness of ourselves to be conscious of our past, our recent past, as well as that most ancient past that they're anxious for us not to know. We must not allow rapists, mass murderers, liars, ungodly people to be our teachers. That's one of the most fatal mistakes we could make. Again, I refer us to the land question in Tanzania and Zimbabwe.
In your presentation, you made reference to a symbolic feature that the people, section of the people in Ghana created this ship to remind public of part and parcel how the African people traveled to the west of Africa across the Atlantic during the Atlantic slave trade. From my own knowledge, I can't think of anywhere any other symbolic gesture of that nature have been made in other Caribbean islands in terms of, how did we get here? And when you look across the Caribbean today, being the 1st of August, where Emancipation Day is being celebrated, where do you think the question of libation as a institutional practice should be part and parcel of the everyday practice of most of the Caribbean life? Because it was that part of the world, though we were there before they came there, they took quite a bit, but libation seems to be looked down on. So what are some of the things you think could be used as part of making libation more visible and to be practiced in that part of the world?
Beautiful question, brother. Let me say that I've put up the picture of that building. I don't know if you want to put it on the screen, but I've focused on it. But let me start my answer, substantial answer to your question, by saying this, making this observation. Libation is part of the Caribbean. It's practiced among the so-called ordinary people, the working people. And it's truncated, it's looked down upon because African culture on the whole is looked down upon in the Caribbean. And part of what is needed is the explanation of African culture, different aspects of African culture, and the significance of each one of them. We need to get Marley and Tosh and Sparrow and all our prophets into our school's curriculum. And we need to get the rituals of our people into the school's curriculum also. I listen to many of us from the Caribbean who claim to be educated. And we quote Shakespeare, we quote whichever European author. We never quote our ancient prophets or our modern prophets. If some of us quote Bob Marley or the Mighty Chopdas or Tobago Crusoe or Sparrow or Burning Spear, it's just for decoration. And we continue to limit and defeat ourselves because we depend upon people who oppress us for our models and our guidance. And we ignore the best of ourselves. And that's one of the most stupid things any group of people could do. If we continue to ignore the best from among ourselves, we'll never be as good as we could be. We'll never make the kind of progress that we could make. Marcus Garvey taught us that self-reliance is extremely important. And if we look around the world and we examine the histories of other people, one thing we're going to learn for certain is this, that there's no group of people who've become good, fortified, successful by imitating other people. It's fundamentally stupid. You're not those other people. And the moment you try to imitate them, you're on a road to destruction. You may borrow things from them, ideas, material objects, but you've got to apply them creatively in your own environment to your own purpose. Not this blind imitation that we've been taught. Not just ignoring the best among you and looking to your oppressors for the sources of guidance and inspiration. Stupid. So part of the response that we must have in the Caribbean is raising the profile of the culture of the vast majority of Caribbean people. Whether we're talking about pouring libation or we're talking about the language we use in the various aspects of the Caribbean, it's the same thing. We have to respect our cultural inheritance as a way of respecting ourselves. Some of us glory in speaking standard English in a certain form, or French or Dutch or some other European language. And we forget, or perhaps we never knew in our profound ignorance, that each one of those languages was once in the same condition that the Creole languages are in the Caribbean today. There was a time when English was unwritten, and so was what became Spanish, and so was what became French. But we've been mesmerized by the lies of our oppressors. And we believe that these languages were born good. And what we speak is not a language, it's a dialect, and it's incapable of attaining written status with rules and so on, which is foolish. So we've got to look for deliverance from among ourselves, not from among the people who've destroyed us.
Another issue I want to raise around there's a comment here coming in. How can we as people prepare and defend when the Europeans and nation respond to our development in the way we see them respond to the development of China, North Korea, and Russia?
Well, there is no one way of defending ourselves. But you see, China, North Korea, Russia, and I might add Cuba, are countries that European countries could try to mess with in certain ways. But they can't do to them what they did to Grenada, for example, or what they did to a country in West Africa, I think is Cote d'Ivoire. You know, walk in and bomb people, kidnap the leaders that they did to Aristide in Haiti, kidnap your leaders. They can't do that to those countries. And the reasons why they can't do that to those countries are generally, one, the people are educated. They know their history. They know who they are. And they're going to defend their freedoms, despite who says what. Once you come messing around them, you're going to get a response that you don't like and you can't handle. The Vietnamese proved that against the French, then against the Americans. The North Koreans, America bombed that country into the Stone Age. That's why they want the best defense they could get, nuclear weapons. How is it that the West is saying that certain countries mustn't get these weapons and they've given Israel those weapons? And they're the only ones who ever dropped. America is the only country that ever dropped a nuclear bomb on another country. So what moral right does America have to say who must get it and who mustn't get it? Do we think about these things? So the first thing is the populations of those countries are armed in the best way possible. They're armed with adequate knowledge about who they are, and they're armed with weapons that could respond to any provocation by Western nations. Now, I said before in this presentation that one of the significant features of the history of the world in the last 600 or so years has been how Western European nations, a resource-starved part of the world, with a culturally backward group of people, have gone around the world imposing themselves upon other countries through military violence and stealing the wealth of those countries and transferring it to Western Europe. It's Caribbean scholars who first started pointing that out. We'll know, especially the works of C.L.R. James and Eric Williams from Trinidad and Tobago, Walter Rodney from Guyana, but there are others before them who were making some of those observations. And it's important for us to understand the processes that we are part of. And the people in Russia and China and Korea and so on, we may not like or even agree with some of the things they do or how they do them. But one thing we could certain about, they've organized themselves, they've defeated the people who try to impose themselves upon them through military violence, and they're not going to give up their gains. It's the same with the people in Iran. They're not going to give up their gains. And African people must learn from what we see taking place in the world around us. Now, I'm not going to say that what's worked in one place, say among the Chinese, will work among us. But we must learn, and we must be capable of borrowing things from other people if we think they will work among us. But one thing we must be clear about, we must not become or allow ourselves to become anybody else. And that's the best way forward. We have shown that we're capable. I mean, we were the leaders in the world for the longest period of time, thousands of years. People from all around the world used to go to Kemet to go to school. China, Europe, that's how many Greeks went there. So what we've done before, we could do again. You cannot tell us that our ancestors could invent civilization, build the pyramids and the temples of Kemet, do the sacred texts, and we're incapable of doing anything? No. The sky is our limit. All we've got to do is put ourselves together again. And discussions like these is part of that process of getting to know ourselves again, re-Africanizing ourselves. And being African not only once a year on occasions like these, but being African for every minute of every hour, of every day, of every week, of every month, of every year, of every decade, every century, every millennium to eternity. That's our duty.
That's our duty. And Brother Kimani, we're almost on time. And as your host for this afternoon, I just want to say how grateful we were to listen to you and our listeners who participated in their different comments. In part of my summing up, I would just like to read you some of what I have summarized from your work, your presentation this afternoon, with a little acoustic poem on the word libation. And it begins, L is for the liberation of African people at home and abroad, and libation is a starting point. I, inspiration to be something to be drawn from our ancestors now and always. B, back to Africa, both mentally and physically. A, African people, be proud of who you are and your heritage. T is for Taki, one of our greatest maroon fighters, and for others, we salute you on today's Emancipation Day 2020. I, inventors of texts, the pyramids, and a great civilization, we have done it and we can do it again. O, organize our parish, as the great Marcus Garvey reminds us. And end, honor our ancestors and honor our past African history and use it to look before us. So thank you again, Brother Kimani, and our listeners out in cyberspace. We thank you for your listenership and for your continued support on programs like these. Brother Kimani?
Thank you
the
very
final
much.
word?
Yes, we talked about libation, and I talked about African people coming together across space and across time to unite on occasions of libation, when we pour libation. And here it is, that in the middle of this pandemic, we're using technology to come together. And this is part of our adaptability, our challenge to successfully adapt so that we could continue to be ourselves. And to me, it's important to make the point that in using this modern technology to speak to each other, to show ourselves and images to each other, we haven't become less African, we have become more African. And this is how we must harness tools that we get, examples, ideas, materials that we get from all around the world. We must harness them, use them to our own purpose without surrendering our identity as African people. The more we talk to each other about things that are of concern to ourselves, the more we become who we need to be. I'm very grateful for the occasion that the PACM has provided for me to be in this conversation with other Africans from different parts of the world. And I want you to know that I will remain thankful for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you again. We'd just like to end this session with the African pledge.
Well, just before I do that, Brother Washi, I've got a couple of announcements I'd like to make. about what's coming up in a few, further meetings coming up. And while I do that, I like to put up Brother Kimani's book, show everybody that the book on libation. And Brother Kimani may want to say a little bit about it and how it can be obtained. If somebody would like to get a copy, what's the best way to go about it? So I'll put your book up now, so it's on the screen. It can be seen. That's your book. So could you just say if somebody wanted a copy, what's the best way to go about obtaining a copy of it?
Well, if you're in North America, you could contact me and I could post you a copy. If you're in Europe, I suspect that the best way would be from the internet, but I'm trying to make arrangements to get a number of copies to one of our people who will be able to distribute it. But I'm hoping that anybody listening in will be able to contact either me directly or contact me through PACM if you would undertake to pass on the message. So, yeah. All right.
Okay, it's a pleasure. Yeah, just send if you can't contact Brother Kimani directly, just contact PSCM and then we'll definitely pass on the message. I will be putting the PSCM email address in the description below so you can make that contact. And just before Brother Washi concludes for tonight, I'd just like to thank Brother Kimani again for a very enlightening discussion, highlighting the various aspects of libation, which is a very, very important ritual. As we know, as he said, libation is a practice that is partaken all over the Pan-African world. I mean, we in the PSCM are a classic example. Before each of our meetings, we will definitely pour libation, and in remembrance, especially in remembrance of our ancestors. I'd just like to say that tomorrow we'll be back again with another presentation. And tomorrow, that's Sunday, the 2nd of August, between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. And that's British time. That's a GMT. And we'll be looking at the topic of the founding of the Organization of African Unity and also the African Union, and just how effective has it been in representing Africans on the continent and also Africans on the diaspora. This will consist of a panel. This will be a panel discussion, and the participants will be Elder Cecil Gottsmore, who is a historian and a community activist. We'll be having Sister Afian, and she'll be coming directly from Nigeria, and she's also an activist in the community, both here and in Nigeria. And we'll also be having Dr. Femi Biko, somebody that's been around many years. A lot of people be very familiar with him. So that will consist of the panel. Then on the 8th, that's Saturday, the 8th of August, we'll be looking at the topic of Marcus Garvey and the Panama Canal. Being August, we are trying to slant a lot of these discussions around Garvey. And Garvey, in terms of the workers on the Panama Canal, had, quite an influence and helping to organize them. So that presentation will be done by Brother Vasco Stevenson, who's very knowledgeable on that area. And then on the 9th, that's Sunday, the 9th of August, again between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m., the topic would be reparations and repatriation. And the presenter of that will be Brother Mandingo. Again, a very knowledgeable brother within the community. So what I'd like to do now is hand it back to Brother Washington, who would conclude the evening for us.
Charge battery is low.
Yeah. Okay. Brothers and sisters, as mentioned, we'll just close off our session this afternoon with the African Pledge, just to remind us of where we are from presently, where we sit, and the challenges that lies ahead as we embark on the liberation road. The African Pledge. We are an African
Please
people.
charge the battery if low.
We will remember the humanity, glory, and the suffering of our ancestors, and honor the struggle of our elders. We will strive to bring new values and new life to our people. We will have peace and harmony among us. We will be loving, sharing, and creative. We will work, study,
Please charge the battery
and
if
listen,
low.
so we may learn, so we may teach. We will cultivate self-reliance. We will struggle to reassure and unify our homeland. We will raise many children for our nation. We will have discipline, patience, devotion, and courage. We will live as models to provide new direction for our people.
Please charge the battery
We will be
if
free
low.
and have self-determination. We are an African people. We will win. All power to our people.
Of people. Okay, thank you very much.